Alright, the next subject that we want to go on and talk about are called arrays. Arrays in JavaScript are sometimes thought of as being a new or separate data type, but in actuality arrays are really just a type of object. So if you wanted to, you could consider them to be another complex data type, but in actuality they're nothing but sort of a special case object. What an array in JavaScript actually is an object that can store multiple values inside it, and because it's an array as opposed to sort of a traditional object, the working with and accessing of the values inside the array is in some ways sort of simplified. A lot of people like to think of arrays as basically being regular variables that can have multiple values stored inside them, sort of like they were in a set of series of separate cubby holes. Since arrays are kind of a data structure, an object, they will be stored in a variable. So we could, for example, say here we have an array that can store 5 separate values and 5 separate cubby holes, if you want to use that terminology. Technically, each one of those squares would be called an element. And we could have all of those stored here under a variable name, for example, days, maybe for storing the days of the week or something like that. Each one of the separate elements inside this array is going to have an index number or a subscript number assigned to it. And it's actually going to be that index number that we use to access and differentiate between the different values that are stored in the array. And like I mentioned before, each one of the separate elements of the array can have a different value stored inside of it. When it comes time to actually work with arrays, the way we're actually going to access the different values inside them is by using what's called array subscript notation. Basically what this is the name of the array in which the array is stored, the name of the variable in which the array is stored, followed by a set of square braces. Inside the square braces we then put in an index number, some integer value, some numeric value, and it's that numeric value which says which one of the different elements of the array that we're actually going to be working with. So here I have days element 0, which means I would be working with the place where Monday is currently shown. I could assign values to that element of the array. I could look at the value that's already stored there, pretty much anything I need to do. So let's go on and take a look at these things actually being used. To demonstrate the use of arrays, what I wanted to do here was put together a little program that's going to kind of operate on the imaginary basis that what we need is to be able to take a numeric day of the week and translate it into an actual string-based name of a day of the week. So I'm talking about doing something like saying day 2 of the week would be, let's say if Sunday is 1, Monday's 2, then day 2 would be Monday is what we'd want it translated into. So if you think about how we might go about doing something like that, we could just put in a bunch of conditional operators at this point that says if the number we're looking for is 1, print out Sunday. If it's 2, print out Monday. But we could actually use arrays to make this quite a bit easier. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here in the head section. I'm going to put a set of script tags in up here, and what I want to do at this point is I want to create an array. So I'm going to create a variable to hold my array. I'm going to call it weekdays. And into that, I'm then going to put a new array. Right? When I actually create a new array this way, I have the option of specifying between the parentheses here a number or leaving it out. If I actually put in a number, then the new array that's created will be that particular size. So in this kind of situation where I know that I want an array that will hold 7 items, I could go ahead and put a 7 there, for example. If I were to leave that number out, which is also perfectly acceptable, then what JavaScript would do is it would start me off with a fairly small array, and then it would simply expand the array as new information was added to it. Having the array already set to the size that we need is slightly more efficient, and it only costs me one number to type, so might as well go ahead and put that in. The next thing I might do then is to actually start assigning values to the array. The array right then at that moment when we actually create it starts off completely empty with each one of its elements being undefined. So if I want it to actually hold the days of the week, I need to go in and actually put the days of the week into the array, something like this. Right. Let me go ahead and just copy and paste that. There we go. Fill in all my other days, each one into a separate element of the array. There we go. So I have element 0 through 6, which totals 7, so that's exactly how big I made my array. And actually, now that I think about it, I want to start my week on Sunday, the way that calendars traditionally do. There we go. So something like that. So after that little bit of code there runs, okay, I will have my array. Into the 0th element, which is essentially the first element of the array, I'll have the string Sunday stored. The second element of the array, which is actually element number 1, I'll have Monday. Element number 2, I'll have Tuesday, and then so on in that way until I get down to element number 6, which is where I actually have Saturday stored. The way I could actually then go on and use this is, let's just say, for example, we want to allow the user to type in a number. What I might do is let's see, I'll use a prompt statement, okay, where I'll ask the user enter a number for a day. Right? They'll enter their number, and the prompt will then return whatever number they entered and store it here in this day variable that I have declared. I could then, to show them what day of the week it actually is, maybe do something like a document write line, and here I could do weekdays, which is the name of my array, and for my element number I will use that day variable. So in essence, if the user types in, let's say, a 3 when they get this prompt, 3 is what will be returned and stored in day, and as a consequence over here 3 is the element of the weekdays array that we will access. So element 3 of the weekdays array will give me back Wednesday. So that string, when it's returned here, is what will actually be printed. So let's try that out and see if it works. Enter a number for a day. I'll enter 3. Wednesday is what we get. Let me refresh and try it again. Let me try day 6. That's Saturday. If I try day 0, that's Sunday. If I try day 109, which obviously doesn't exist, I get back undefined. So everything seems to be just fine the way it is, and there's a quick little use of an array for us. There's certainly a lot of other things we could do with arrays, lots of other potential things that could we could use for setting them up or for using them for. For example, in this particular example, having to go through all of these different statements to initialize my array is really quite a bit annoying, I would say. Probably not something that I'd really want to do. So there are some other ways that I can actually go through this. I'm just going to comment those lines out. Okay. What I could, for example, do instead is I could put the names of all the days of the week as comma-separated arguments to the array constructor function. So I could do Sunday, Monday, ooh boy, Tuesday, and so forth. Last one. There we go. All right. What this will do is this will still create an array for us just like it was previously, only this time the array is going to be pre-sized and pre-initialized based on the arguments that I'm passing to the array constructor function. So an element of the array will be created for each one of the different elements that I provide there, each one of the different strings or arguments that I provide there, and the array of course will then end up being that size. If I go back over to my browser and take a look at it now, 3 still gives me Wednesday, 6 still gives me Saturday, 109 still gives me undefined, 0 still gives me Sunday. Okay. While we're at that point, you might also notice that with arrays, they always start off at element 0, which when you work with them for a while just becomes second nature and you don't tend to think about it very much. Starting at 0 just makes sense. But to a user, like in this case, most people would say that day 0 is not Sunday. They would say that Sunday is the first day of the week, day 1. So a way you can sometimes get around that kind of problem is just by providing a empty string as one of the elements. So what we have here then is 0 is blank, and then 1 is Sunday, and Saturday is 7. So everything sort of lines up a little bit more with what a user's normal expectations would be. So now if I say give me day 1, the first day of the week, it tells me Sunday. Give me day 7, that's Saturday. So that kind of makes everything line up a little bit better. So that is another way that we could create our array here, and you can see it is quite a bit more concise than having to go through all of these separate statements to initialize all of the elements of the array. There are yet, of course, still other ways, however. We could, for example, do away with that entirely, and we could use an array constant. Or I'm sorry, an array literal. We know numeric literals and string literals, and we've even talked about object literals. Whenever we want to use an array literal, what we do is we simply provide a set of square braces with all of our arguments inside it. Maybe what I'll actually do here is come back up and copy these that I already have so that I don't have to type them out again, as much as I'm sure you'd like to see that. So something along these lines. That will give me still an array. Okay, this time an array literal. JavaScript will simply understand that when it sees all of these different arguments separated by commas inside a set of square braces, that what we're asking for is to have an array created for us. So if I come back over my browser, hit refresh, day 1 is still Sunday, day 7 is still Saturday, and everything still works just the same way it did before. So you can see everything's pretty flexible. We have quite a few different ways that we can create arrays. Quite a few different ways, of course, that we can actually work with them. Here I'm, of course, just filling an array with values and letting the user then access them. But there's certainly nothing that would stop us from being able to go back and change the value of an array. For example, if one day we decide we want to switch to a slightly different structure for the week, maybe, for example, somebody decides that Mondays are just too depressing, so instead we're going to call that Noah Day, right? Which certainly will make everybody nice and cheerful. Then what we could do is in our weekdays array, we go to element 2, which is the position in the array where Monday is currently stored, and I assign to it the string Noah Day, which of course will replace the string Monday. Go back and take a look at that in my browser. Day 1 is Sunday, day 7 is Saturday, and day 2 is Noah Day. Everybody's favorite day of the week, I'm sure. As I mentioned to you before, arrays are actually a type of object in JavaScript. They're not actually their own separate data type. Just to kind of demonstrate, if I throw some script tags here into the body of a new web page that I'm putting together, and then I create an array, which I will imaginatively call array, I'm going to create it here as an array literal, and I'll just put in the values 1, 2, and 3, which of course will go into the 0th element, the number 1 element, and the number 2 element. That gives us a simple little array that we can actually play with there. Now, if I go in and do a document.writeLine and use the type of operator and ask it what data type is array, right? What we'll actually see when we come back over to our browser is that it sure enough reports to us that an array is an object. The actual data type of array is object. Because an array is an object, in a way, that's actually kind of nice because it tells us some things about arrays. We know that arrays can have behaviors associated with them. We know that arrays can have variables or values stored inside them, attributes that describe them. For example, if I do another document.writeLine here, I could say length of array is, and then here I'm going to take the name of my array, which is just array, and I'm going to put .length, which in our object notation we know means that I'm accessing the length data member, or the length attribute or value that's stored inside the variable called array. If I take a look at that in my browser, it tells me the length of the array is 3. And if we come back and remind ourselves what our array actually looked like, right? When I created it, I actually put 3 values into it, and sure enough, length tells me that the size of the array, the length of the array is 3. And that will of course change as I add or remove things from the array. So arrays certainly are objects. Is it also true then to say that objects are arrays? Well, it's kind of an interesting question. Let's take a look. I'm going to make another set of script tags here inside the head section, and let's make ourselves a little constructor function for, I don't know, let's say a person, where we're going to give them a first name and a last name, and I'm going to pass those 2 values to the constructor function. So I'm going to do this dot first underscore name equals fname. This dot last underscore name equals lname. So 2 values will be passed to the constructor function, a first name and a last name. The first name will be put into the new object in a variable called first name. The lname value will be put into a variable inside the object called last name. So let me come back down to my body tags, take a look here inside these script tags, and let's create a person called P. Right? For person, I'm going to say person is a new person, and their name will be, let's do Eddie Dean. There we go, something like that. And of course, at that point, I should be able to do something like do a document.writeLine and print out p.firstname, and it should come out as Eddie. If I take a look at my browser, sure enough, there's Eddie. So we have our object. Our object is working just fine. Now here I did p.firstname using the dot notation that we've learned about previously to access the first name attribute that is a part of the person object. But what if instead of doing that, what if I instead tried to access it more like it was an array, something like that? So P is still my object, but instead of doing the dot operator, what I'm now doing is I'm using the array subscript notation, the square braces, and instead of putting an integer value here inside them, what I'm doing is I'm putting in the name of the attribute inside the object as a string. And if I take a look at that over in my browser, you can see that it still works just fine. It still pulls up Eddie. Just to reiterate that, if I were to do the same thing and were to do last name as the property instead, there's Dean. Okay? So it turns out that objects, basically any type of object, can actually be accessed sort of as if it were an array, using the array type notation instead of the dot operator. Now, most of the time, of course, the dot operator is quicker, it's easier, it's cleaner, a lot less typing involved, a lot less chances for mistakes. But occasionally, if you run into a situation where this kind of thing is necessary, it's nice that we are able to access objects this way. For example, what if I wanted to be able to access a value of an array, an attribute of an object, but maybe the actual attribute that I want to access is dynamic. I don't know exactly what it is. What if I, for example, had a variable called attribute or attrib, and I had stored in it last_name, the name of one of the object's attributes? I could actually then use that attrib variable here, okay, instead of the actual string literal, and that will still let me access the last name. You can see it still pulls up Dean just like it was before. So it's possible that I could read from some data source and it could tell me which attribute of the object should be read or looked at, and then with that dynamically gained data, okay, I could then still be able to access that particular attribute of my object, which is not something I could have done with the dot operator. So in some kind of situations, sometimes can be a little bit strange. It can be convenient that we can access objects as if they were arrays. So the original question was, if arrays are a type of object, are objects a type of array? And I would say in general, yes, they pretty much are. But the correspondence, the relationship between the two is not actually perfect. For example, up here where I have my array called array, in element 0 it has the string 1 stored. If I put in a document.writeLine array element 0, and I'm going to follow that with a break. Okay, it prints out 1, just like you'd expect. Okay, but if we can access objects like they were arrays, can we access arrays like they were objects? Basically, instead of the array subscript notation, could we use the dot operator instead, like that? And in that case, the answer is no. Everything kind of blows up, it doesn't recognize it, and really what the problem is here is that 0, of course, is numeric. What it's expecting after the dot operator is a variable, and variables are not allowed to be purely numeric or to start with numbers. You might remember way back in a previous episode when we talked about the rules for naming variables. So what if it wasn't numeric? What if I put quotes around it and turned it into a string? You can see the answer is still no. Everything breaks. So I can access objects like arrays, but I cannot access arrays like objects. But then kind of the funny part is that arrays actually are objects. So there is a strange relationship between the two, and which one you use often will kind of depend on the situation.